Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, as you listen to this testimony, where is the defense going with this in such great and horrific detail?
Yeah, thank you, Marni. This is really tough to listen to because, like, as you mentioned, this is extremely graphic and, if I may say, gross. And a lot of the jurors are having the same reaction. Here's what I think the defense is doing. This is a very masterful, subliminal defense. Why do I say that? I say that because Alex Murdaugh's reaction to this testimony, which is over the top and which, frankly, the jury doesn't need. We know how these two victims died. We know one was shot with a shotgun, one was shot with a rifle. We know that. These graphic details are unnecessary. But what the defense is doing is every tear that comes out of Alex Murdaugh's face, every genuine reaction, every nose sniff, every tissue rub is not getting lost on that jury. And they have to say, as human beings, look, this is a man who is feeling genuine pain having to live through this. If he did not do it, he is garnering an extreme amount of sympathy with this jury, and that may be enough to either put them in a not guilty column or for this jury not to be able to decide on a verdict and end up with a hung jury.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly difficult to listen to and even to watch his reaction to it, whether he did it or not. It's very emotional. The other thing that the prosecution did with this witness was talk about the trajectory of the bullets. And we learned this morning that Maggie was shot twice when she was facing the shooter, but then once it entered her kidney area, she would have doubled over and she was turned away from the shooter on the ground and then shot again in the head. How does that help the prosecution or not?
You know, I'm going to go out on a limb and say right now the prosecution has, for all intents and purposes, jumped the prosecutorial shark with this information, because the only thing that the jury might get from this is that perhaps the person who shot these two poor victims was familiar to them, which is why they didn't have their hands up, which is why they were facing whoever the shooter happened to be. Now, that doesn't make it Alex Murdaugh. That could be the gardener, which we got some really interesting testimony about DNA under Maggie Murdaugh's fingernails yesterday. So that's the only real inference, I guess, that could be made. It still doesn't get us that much closer to who actually did it, at least not from a defense perspective. So I don't know why the prosecution wanted to go in such great depth with this pathologist. I think it was a mistake for the reason I said earlier. Look, I have sympathy for Alex Murdaugh, and if I do, other people do too, including members of that jury.
The jury didn't seem to have sympathy, though, based on people who were in the court last week when testimony was shared about his financial crimes. In fact, it was described as the jury being disgusted hearing the amount of money he allegedly stole from his clients and his colleagues. So the jury has a tough job. They're on an emotional roller coaster trying to figure out what happened.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so interesting because there is still that one lingering question. When I talk to my colleagues or people who are not lawyers, they will invariably say to me, I still don't get why being in financial dire straits would be a motive to kill your wife and kid. Like, there's still a disconnect there for a lot of people. And again, if they're representative of the jury, then the jury might be having a disconnect too. And remember, this reaction from Alex Murdaugh today and throughout this testimony might trump how disgusted they were about his financial misdeeds. And his financial misdeeds are disgusting. But do they make him a murderer? That's the key question. It still has not been answered, in my opinion.
What other tricks do you think the defense has up their sleeve when they get a chance to bring witnesses to the stand, character witnesses, to defend and speak for Alex Murdaugh and who he is?
I'll tell you what I'm wondering right now. Will Alex Murdaugh take the stand? On the one hand, I think he almost has to, Marni, and I think the defense could play this very carefully. Since he is still facing charges for all the financial misdeeds, there's 99 indictments hanging out there. I'm wondering if technically he could plead the fifth and not talk about the misdeeds, not give the jurors another chance to listen to all those misdeeds. He could say, listen, I have a Fifth Amendment right not to testify about that, which would put him in a very narrow lane to only address his behavior on the nights of these crimes, his character, etc. It's risky and it's difficult, but I wouldn't be surprised if I see that coming down the pike.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.